Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and I'm here with part 6 of my journey to becoming an activist. And we just finished talking about my pregnancy with my daughter and how I felt pressure to abort, even though nobody actually said that that's what I should do. Now, after our daughter was born, my husband decided to join the Army because then he'd be sure that his family would have medical care and a housing allowance, we'd be good. But it turned out not to be such a great idea. The first duty station was Fort Ord, California. Housing was phenomenally expensive, and we only had 30 days that we could stay in the guest house and find a place to live. Roach-infested studio apartments in a bad part of town were still over $100 more than our housing allowance. Now, I finally found a place that seemed affordable and was still safe and clean, but it was clear out in Salinas. There were no other people there that were military that my husband could carpool with. And we found out after we moved in that the landlord considered a refrigerator to be furniture, not an apartment. So there we were, far from grocery stores, with this old clunker gas guzzler car that my husband was having to make a long commute in every day. And I was having to buy food from a little mini mart. It was expensive. And we started selling our possessions to buy food. And I started skipping meals so that I could feed my little daughter. And we made friends with our neighbor, Sherry, who was also a newlywed. And she really took a shine to Lisa. And by October of that year, Sherry and I were both pregnant. Now, again, I had been feeding my daughter by skipping meals myself. Now, all of a sudden, I was one of those poor women who need abortions that Dr. Zabodny had taught us about in biology of sex class. I knew that what was inside me was a baby. I knew that an abortion would be killing my baby. But I had been taught that the responsible thing to do would be to bear that emotional and moral burden, because otherwise I couldn't eat, which meant I wouldn't be feeding the unborn baby, and I wouldn't be able to skip meals and have enough food to feed the born one. But I just couldn't make that phone call to Planned Parenthood to go down and have the abortion. I was really in a quandary. Meanwhile, Sherry was really excited about being pregnant, and that's when she told me about her past. When she was in high school, she'd been helping her mother run a daycare center, and Sherry wanted to have a baby. And she thought, I'm taking care of babies all day. Why can't one of them be mine? And she went off her birth control pills and got pregnant. Well, when she told her mother came to her later and said, I have $160 and you have an appointment at Planned Parenthood. So you have a choice. You can go through with that abortion at Planned Parenthood, go through with your appointment, or I will take you to the bus stop, the bus station, and you can buy a one-way ticket to anywhere that $160 will take you. Now, Sherry didn't know that her mother couldn't do that. So she thought her choices were be thrown out in the street or go through with the abortion. So she went for the appointment, and as she told me, she was processed like a blood donor. There was no one-on-one counseling. They were given their informed consent in a group, and then they were asked, does anybody have any questions? And Sherry said she raised her hand and asked about the baby. They told her there was nothing even remotely like a baby, that what was in the uterus was nothing more than a blob of tissue like a blood clot. So Sherry had gone through with the abortion. It wasn't until after the abortion that she got the one-on-one counseling and they learned that this was a wanted pregnancy, that she'd been bullied into aborting. And Sherry was so squeamish about touching herself, she wouldn't even use tampons. Now, 3 guesses what birth control method they sent her home with. Unmotivated, can't stand to touch herself. They sent her home with a diaphragm. Needless to say, the diaphragm sat unused in the dresser, and Sherry got pregnant again. And she begged her mother, please, please, please don't take me to Planned Parenthood. So her mom just arranged for a private OBGYN to do a second unwanted abortion on Sherry. So much for women making their own choices. So as soon as Sherry was 18, she got married and got pregnant again to finally have a baby she could keep. Sherry didn't have a phone. She'd call her family on my phone and I'd hear, "But Mom, I don't want another abortion. But Grandma, I don't want another abortion." They were still bullying her even when she'd moved out and she was married. So Sherry was excited. Sherry was ready for this. But again, I was there. I had been taught in college that the only responsible choice I could make would be to bear the moral and emotional burden of aborting my baby in order to be able to feed my daughter. But I couldn't bring myself to make the call. Now, if I had had a pro-choice friend, that pro-choice friend would have patted me on the hand and said, "I know that this isn't what you want to do, but clearly it's what you need to do." And my friend would have walked me through an abortion and would have felt like she was being the most supportive person imaginable, doing what was right for me. Fortunately, I did not have a pro-choice friend. Our best friend was my husband's friend from basic training, Eddie, who was the pro-choice movement's biggest nightmare. A pro-life Catholic from a large family that believed that when people were in trouble, you helped them. And Eddie recognized that the problem was really the apartment. He said, "You're out in the middle of nowhere. You can't go shopping. Craig's burning up more gas than really is even remotely reasonable. You need to find another place to live." And I was like, I looked and looked and looked. And he said, "Well, you're going to look again." And he had to practically drag us out to the car. And we very quickly found an apartment cheaper than the one we were in, really close to my husband's work. He could carpool, and we were across the street from a grocery store. And this apartment came with a refrigerator. And I invested a little bit of money on a long distance call, because this was back before cell phones, so that I could talk to Eddie's mother. Eddie was from a family of Mexican descent. His mother spoke Spanglish, not English. So when I was on the phone, Eddie sometimes had to translate for me. But Eddie's mother taught me how to make really good food with beans and rice and cornmeal and lard and a little bit of ground beef and some onions and garlic. Very quickly, we got to the point where we weren't just eating healthy, we could afford to have guests over for dinner. Again, this is the kind of support I think every woman should be able to get. And I don't understand why, when pro-lifers offer women this support, we get demonized and treated like we're cruel and we're not respecting the women. Well, in the meantime, though, I had been convinced that those first couple months when I hadn't been eating because I didn't realize I was pregnant, I had irrevocably harmed my unborn baby. So the joy of that pregnancy was sucked out of me again by the pro-abortion rhetoric I'd been fed in college. I gave birth to a perfectly healthy baby, and by now I was extremely, extremely pissed off at pro-choice activists. And then we get kind of the pièce de résistance. There was a billboard in Santa Cruz, California, that had that famous photo of the adult hand holding the aborted baby, so all you see is his tiny little feet. The billboard just said, "Aborted 10 weeks into life," and gave a phone number to call a pro-life center. For some reason, the local news decided to interview the director of a local abortion clinic. She said, "We've been getting hundreds of angry phone calls from women wanting to know why they weren't given this information before their abortions. We want that billboard down." That told me that what had happened to Sherry at Planned Parenthood hadn't been a fluke, that this was a pattern, that not only was this pressure on the women prior to even getting pregnant, that if you get pregnant, man, you are going straight to the abortion clinic, but that they would lie to you when you got there and that they were trying to stand between you and any information you might get. That was it. That is when I called Birthright and became a volunteer. No more betraying women. I was going to have none of it, and I was going to spend the rest of my life fighting it tooth and nail.